Richard Ramirez is a convicted American serial killer of Latin American descent. Also known as the Night Stalker, Ramirez is responsible for at least 13 victims. Richard Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. He was the fifth and youngest child in the family of Mexican immigrant and former police officer Julian Ramirez, who was working as a railroad worker at the time of Richard's birth. As a child, Ramirez suffered from epilepsy. The seizures continued for several years and stopped only when Richard became a teenager. At school, Richard did not stand out among his peers and was periodically bullied by other students. According to the recollections of his classmate, Richard began using soft drugs and smoking marijuana at the age of 10, before which his school performance was average, but after his academic performance and discipline dropped completely. Ramirez's father was prone to fits of anger, which regularly led to physical violence. Not only his wife, but also his children suffered. Ramirez would run away from the heavy fists to the cemetery, often sleeping on graves. Richard left home and slept on the street until his older sister Ruth took him in. Her husband Roberto, a notorious drug addict, got Richard addicted to LSD and told him about Satanism, an occult worldview that Ramirez called himself a follower of until the last days of his life. There is information that Julian Ramirez tied Richard to a cross in the cemetery and mocked him. Richard's first victim was a 79-year-old woman, whom he stabbed to death with a knife. The next time, Ramirez, dressed in all black, shot 3 young people with a pistol, but thanks to a lucky coincidence, the bullet ricocheted off the keys clutched in his hand. 1 girl survived, as a result of which the police had their first verbal description of the killer's portrait. An elusive serial killer begins a real campaign of terror against the population of California. At night, he breaks into houses, robs, rapes, kills. However, he deliberately leaves some victims alive. Soon, Ramirez begins to declare his commitment to Satanism in a peculiar way. He leaves pentagrams at the crime scenes. For example, he drew one with lipstick on the inner thigh of a murdered 83-year-old woman, and he also forced his victims to say, "I love Satan." Ramirez's victims are small children. For example, on June 27, 1985, he raped a 6-year-old girl. Ramirez attacked completely different people, which is not typical for serial killers, who, as a rule, have their own clearly defined type of victim. The media gave him the nickname Night Stalker, which was very flattering to Ramirez himself, since his favorite song was AC/DC's Night Prowler. A composite sketch of Ramirez was shown on television and published in newspapers, but it yielded no results. Ramirez's last surviving victim was able to see the car he had driven away in. It was an old orange Toyota with scratches. All Los Angeles police forces were thrown into searching for the car. The car was found in a parking lot on the outskirts of the city. Among hundreds of fingerprints, they found Richard Ramirez's fingerprints, which matched the composite sketch very well. By August 27, leaflets with a photo of the maniac himself appeared on the streets of the city, announcing his search. As it turned out, the police were helped by circumstances. Since August 24, Ramirez was out of state and did not know anything about being wanted by the police, so, having returned to Los Angeles on the morning of August 31, he went to the store to do some shopping as if nothing had happened. People who saw the killer in the store immediately recognized him as the Night Stalker who had terrorized Los Angeles. The police took the suspect to the station. In November 1989, the court sentenced Richard Ramirez to death in the gas chamber. He awaited execution on death row. The killer's father, Julian Ramirez, trying to find the reasons that prompted his son to commit brutal murders, gave an interview in 1985 in which he stated that drugs were to blame for everything. He noted that drugs are easy to buy in El Paso schools, and there is no administrative control over this. Ultimately, their abuse contributed to the final moral decay of his son Richard. One of Ramirez's acquaintances, Eddie Gonzalez, expressed a different point of view. In his opinion, Richard's mental problems appeared after a car accident in 1980. Richard himself escaped with only a fright, but his close friend Nicolas Navarez died. According to Gonzalez, depression and worries about the death of his best friend, together with drug addiction, pushed Ramirez to commit crimes. Ramirez spent the rest of his life on death row. While in prison, he received many letters. He married one of his fans, Doreen Lowy, in October 1996. The wedding took place in the visiting room of the prison building. In recent years, Ramirez has become more reclusive while in prison. He repeatedly exposed himself to prison staff and visitors in an indecent manner. He masturbated in front of visiting relatives and relatives of other inmates. After this, he was forbidden to touch anyone, and all subsequent visits took place in a room divided by a partition. After a fight he caused in 2000, he was forbidden to have contact with other death row inmates. Beginning in 2007, he had no visitors, and in the last years of his life, Ramirez refused to meet with anyone. Ramirez spent most of his time in front of the television in his cell. Despite this, he remained the most popular prisoner until his death, and the wave of interest in him did not subside. On June 7, 2013, Ramirez died in a hospital from liver failure while in prison, at the age of 53.